Well, good morning, everybody. How are you today? It's a beautiful day here in Texas. I got some sleep last night, so I'm feeling good. And I'm waiting for the ever important do I hear myself in my headphones? And I do. Yay! So look at that. Audio's working. All is right in the world today. So we are going to be talking, once again, we're talking about food as a reinforcer this week, and an interesting topic: can food be addictive? Again, our topics kind of overlap with human behavior and animal behavior. Hey, Annetta, cold and sunny in Denmark. Yeah, it's a little cold here as well, but probably not as cold as it is in Denmark. But yeah, so I think this is going to be an interesting topic, and again, I have a research. Well, this isn't so much a research article, but sort of an overview of some research that is my reference material, which I will share with you in just a minute. But before we get started, for the newbies, this is You Be the Behavior Consultant, a live stream I try to do most every Monday if I can. It's hard to believe, but I have over 90 of these now since we started doing these. And how does it work? I present a topic for discussion, and this one I hope will be interactive as well, because we want to have your perspective, your experiences. And I do have a few videos to share that I think will generate some interesting discussion. And we will recap everything at the end. And as I said, our topic this week is, can food be addictive for animals? What does that mean? So, yeah, we do have to ask some questions then. We have to explore this topic. What does it mean to be addictive? That's the first thing. And if you read the description that I put out in the announcement, one of our first questions is we're going to have to answer is, what does it mean to be addictive? We're going to have to operationalize addiction and addictive. And some other questions I have to ask about this topic is it about the food items? What are some other factors that might be things we need to take into consideration that may contribute to this situation? And then we really want to bring it back to animal training. What might be these implications in some of the things that we do in animal training? So I know that's a lot of heavy stuff, isn't it? Oh my gosh. And I'll come back to these questions here in just a second, but I want to give you a resource that is where I got a lot of my inspiration for this week's topic. And it's from a researcher named Rebecca Corwin, who is actually somebody that Joe Lang referred me to back when I was doing that paper on weight management and the ethical considerations. He referred me to Rebecca Corwin as a resource, and she's got a lot of research out there on food addiction and binge eating behaviors. And so this paper, which you can find, this is an open source because it's really just a review of a symposium. And so it's called Symposium Overview, Food Addiction, Fact or Fiction. And it's just a 3-page review. So it's a relatively easy read if you want to. It's not even 3 pages, actually. I think the 3rd page is just reference material. But it's a nice overview of some things that were discussed at the symposium. And yeah, so that's a little bit of our reference material there. And for those of you that are members of animaltrainingfundamentals.com, I can also make sure that paper is available for you in the replay of this particular You Be the Behavior Consultant. So going back to our topic here, anybody have some thoughts on this? What do you think? Or anybody had any experiences where you felt like, boy, this animal seems really interested in getting this particular food item? Or do you have any thoughts about what might it look like if an animal, or human for that matter, what does it look like to be addicted to food? I mean, that's the first thing we might want to talk about. or are there particular food items that maybe a certain animal might be more attracted to for any particular reason? And what are conditions that might create that situation? Those are kind of my main questions there we might want to start with. Any thoughts about those things? I know it's weird stuff to think about, but when I read papers like this, this little overview here, it gets me thinking about these things that because food is such a thing that we use so often in animal training. It's kind of almost a go-to, which again, when I get into these discussions with people really thinking about, especially the constructional approach, sort of avenue to animal training, where we start thinking more about functional reinforcers, we start drifting away from only looking at food. So Annetta says overexcited around food or feeding time. So yeah, maybe there's maybe kind of a different attitude, I guess, or a different behavioral response around certain food items or around feeding times. Maybe that's something that you observe. How would we determine that an animal might be, have a sort of different relationship or a different response to certain food items versus others? Yeah, this is really what we're trying to figure out, right? How could we determine this? What would you look at to answer that question? And that's what the researchers has to ask, right? So we have way in the 60s and 70s, there were a lot of parrots in cafes who were given alcohol on a regular basis. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. That's not a nice thing. It was not food, but they were addicted. Oh my goodness. Wow. Okay. Sometimes I wonder if my cockatoos are addicted to sunflower seeds because they show great excitement in trying to access them. So that's a really good thing that you mentioned right there. So we talk about a specific food item, sunflower seeds, and maybe you might want to think about what are the characteristics of that sunflower seed that makes them maybe more okay. So let's talk about two things there. I think there's two really important things that you mentioned there. So we can look at the characteristics of sunflower seeds. And then the other thing that you talk about is great excitement in trying to access them. So one of the things that's mentioned in a potential characteristic of addiction is how much work the animal or human might try to do to access that particular food item. So, and there's a way that we can test that, and we'll talk about that in just a second here. Other needs or types of enrichment lose value over addictive items. Yeah, so maybe it takes control of the animal's or person's life, so that and so the fat in the sunflower seeds is particularly interesting, or seems so. Fatty foods tend, for some animals, we should say, fatty foods tend to be something that they gravitate towards. My experience, I've seen some companion birds that come into rescues that their diet was just fatty foods. When the bird gets to a new home, the person opens a fridge or cabinet, the bird flies. So like they know that they've learned. Okay, so that's a really good point, Sheila. So that the animals have learned that when people open cabinets, that it's going to be a signal that they're going to get access to foods that have maybe high fat in them. So that becomes a cue to the animal that the good stuff that's got the fat in it is going to be accessible. Yeah. Okay. You guys are actually hitting a lot of the points that are in the article. You guys are really good. Yes, exactly. Oh, I love this. Yep. So fats are one of the things that was identified, that basically high energy food items can be things that animals or humans might gravitate towards more as something that they might eat an excessive amount of, and that they can learn certain signals or cues, might be meaning that there's access to those things, and that they might work harder than they normally would for, let's say lettuce in my case, to get access to those particular things. Yes. See, look at you guys. You're very good at this stuff. So what other things? What other things? Yeah, it's funny because that sunflower seed thing that comes up a lot in the bird, especially the parrot training world. People will say parrots are addicted to sunflower seeds. If an animal is addicted and denied access to that food, does dysfunctional behavior occur? Ah, very good. This yeah, so withdrawal is actually something. So you've talked about withdrawal. So there can be a physiological withdrawal, and there can also be so I'm trying to think if they talked about withdrawal in animals in terms of behavioral. Yes. Did they? We'll have to. Let's see when we go through my notes here. I can't remember if they talked about behaviors that were seen, like showing distress when they couldn't have access to the thing that they really wanted. I can't remember now, but we'll go through the slides and see if that comes up. But that's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. But certainly there was physical, like a physical response of withdrawal for some of these organisms that they, because they obviously, when in the research, they set these things up in the lab as well. So, yeah, I'm trying to remember if they mentioned that in as far as like if the animal shows behavioral responses that they get sort of, I don't know, aggressive, or if they show aggressive responses or frustrated, or what they might show in terms of trying to access it. Certainly, the showing more work for it, I'll do a lot to get it type of thing. That's a good question. Well, when I get through my notes here again, we'll see if that one comes up. Yeah, those are all very good responses. So let's see. So I might go ahead and bring up one of these slides here, because you guys have come up with a lot of good things. So here's the definition. Oh, yes, sugar itself are highly addictive also to animals. Yep. So thank you for bringing that one up. So both sugar and fat were mentioned in the studies as things that could be, sort of the physical properties of the food that seem to be ones that animals and humans are more inclined to gravitate towards as things that they could potentially become addicted to, so to speak. And orange juice for one of my African grays, unchecked, he will drink till he almost bursts the sugar. Yeah, same. Sorry. Yep, you guys are both on the right track there. Yes. So I'm glad that you mentioned the sugar as well. So and they, I think a way to give it a name, they said high energy. And of course, when you look at these studies, they've only worked with a limited amount of animals. And if you were to think of, our world, there's so many different species that we could be looking at that may not necessarily gravitate towards sugar and fat. Like I think, a bird of prey isn't going to go for something that's got necessarily sugar in it, but maybe fat would be appealing. I don't know. But, have all those things been studied in the lab? Probably not. But so they would say high energy is what kind of their catch-all phrase. But definitely in the lab, they've looked at sugar and fat a lot. So defining addiction in humans, they've said for a person to be considered dependent or addicted to any given substance, at least 3 of the following 7 criteria must be met at any given time within a given year. So this is what they have. So 1, tolerance, more, quote, drug is needed for the same effect. 2, withdrawal, which Chris said, taking a larger amount of the substance or taking the substance for a longer period than was intended. Experiencing a persistent desire for the substance or inability to reduce or control its use, spending much time seeking or consuming the substance or recovering from its effects, use of the substance interfering with important activities, use of the substance continuing despite known adverse consequences. If either criterion 1 or 2 is met, then physiological dependence is diagnosed. However, a diagnosis of substance dependence does not require the criterion 1 or 2 be met. Thus, human substance dependence or addiction can be diagnosed using entirely behavioral criteria. Salty items, maybe. Yeah, that's interesting to think about. So, so that's the human one. And Annetta says, we don't use fruit for monkeys or only very little because of the high content of sugar. Yeah, and I do think when I was looking at some of my videos, I used several primate examples because I think of how so much of it is similar to human stuff. I did also want to bring up this other thing that was in the art. Was it in this article? I looked at a few articles, to be honest, but there was also some mention of the chemistry that happens. So in the food addiction animal studies and the neurochemical responses, it said there was a study that described how withdrawal from a high-fat diet leads to neurochemical responses comparable to those induced by withdrawal from a drug. So I guess this goes back to what Chris said that I wasn't sure about. So I guess there is some stuff here that's in here. They also describe how affective states, such as depression, a key feature of drug withdrawal, can modify endogenous signals, and I'm going to explain what those are in a minute, involved in food intake regulation. Another study provides convincing evidence that binging on sugar can induce behavioral and neuronal changes in rats similar to those induced by drugs of abuse. In addition, Pelchat discusses how external stimuli such as cues can modulate food seeking and food intake in important ways via classical conditioning. So this is the thing about the cabinet door opening and saying that there's, goodies in there. All these articles illustrate that the fact that food, at least in part, acts on the same neuronal systems as do drugs of abuse. And just to talk about what the endogenous opioid system is. Since the discovery and verification of the components of the endogenous opioid system in the 1970s, consisting of all these things, all these receptors and cognitive religion, all those things, a role of the endogenous opioid system in addition to opiates has been established. Further studies demonstrate the long-term opiate addiction results in the relative endogenous endorphin deficiency, which contributes to the chronic relapsing nature of the disease. Subsequent studies utilizing pharmacological approaches, gene expression, and receptor binding techniques in animal models of addiction, as well as transgenic mouse knockout studies, have revealed the endogenous opioid system to be important in the effects of other addictive substances, and this has been verified in human genetic studies demonstrating associations of variants in genes encoding the components of the opioid system with addiction to opiates, cocaine, and alcohol. So basically, just kind of, letting you know that some chemical stuff is going on there. And which is really interesting. I mean, those of you who have had, I know I've had this experience myself where, like if I've been on a trend of eating a bunch of bad food for a while, that's not very good for me. Instead of sort of feeling like, oh, I've had enough of that, I'm ready to go back to eating healthy, I might stay on that trend for a while and feel like I want to keep eating bad food. And it does feel like it's like an addiction, and I've had those conversations with my friends, and so it's kind of interesting to hear that they've been able to demonstrate that there is a physiological response going on there. It's not just behavioral, but obviously there is behavioral components as well as what they're demonstrating, which is no surprise, right? No, there's no surprise that there's behavioral stuff there going on, but it's also nice to hear that you're not crazy, that there is some neurological stuff, going on, or chemical responses going on in your body as well. So I did want to go back to, let's see if this is the right one. Yeah. So I wanted to go back to operationalizing addiction in animals though, because, they talked about that human model, but how do they do it in the lab? How can they take animals and say, okay, well, how do we know if an animal's, quote, addicted to something, and do these studies? And so here's what they came up with. So can they show escalation of intake across time? So taking in a large amount of food, sort of like in an out of control way. And maybe that's that what you were saying, the orange juice for one of your African grays, like that he'll drink till he almost bursts. Oh, and Sheila says, okay, this makes me feel a little bit better. I will admit I had a sugar addiction. I have minimized sugar, and my friends will say that you have to get used to not having it. And I will have it say once in a blue moon. Yeah. I also watched this movie a couple weeks ago. I can't remember, but I don't remember what the exact title was, but it was something about a sugar thing and about how sugar is in so many of our food products and how it affects our constant sort of drive to take in sugar, and that if you eliminate it, that you get to where your palate is no longer sort of seeking sugar all the time. And then, Coca-Cola is such a high. Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. Where was I? Oh, unwillingness to work harder to get the substance. So high motivation to obtain and consume the substance. Greater responding during periods when the drug is not available. So increased time spent seeking the drug, and increased responding despite aversive consequences. So use continues despite adverse consequences. And so the way they did that is they would so they've got a rat that's trained to push a lever or a button, and they might introduce shock right before the animal. And so you may recall this with some of the stuff that Joe Lang was talking about teaching, so when we talk about animals that have no degrees of freedom, so they can only do one behavior to access that desired outcome, they'll tolerate shock in order to get that desired outcome. And especially if they can't get the outcome unless they have to take the shock, they'll seek out shock in order to get the outcome. So if they have no other way to get that reinforcer. So she said work from her group has made some use of some of these criteria to demonstrate that addiction-like behavior, escalation of intake, increased willingness to work for fat or cocaine, increased cocaine taking can be induced in rats with a history of binging on fat. Note that word there, binging. Moreover, we found that the use of more restricted access schedule to fat led to more addiction-like behavior in rats. The article by Avina et al. Describes strong evidence for addiction-like behavior and neurological alterations in rats, binging on sugar, and how some of these effects differ from those that occur when rats. Oh, okay. And so there's also some differ from those that binge on fat. So I think a lot of what's said here is interesting. There's more to unpack here. So here we're getting into the world of some of the behavioral stuff. And so this is where it gets a little bit more fuzzy. And so I want you guys to think on that for a little bit. And one thing I want to share while you're thinking about that is this progressive ratio schedule of reinforcement, because you may not be familiar with this because this is not something we're typically using in animal training. But when they were talking about how much work will the animal do to get the reinforcer, this is that progressive ratio. And so the progressive ratio basically means that they're going to gradually increase the work that the animal does in order to get that, that fatty food or that sugary food, or in this case, they were using like sweetened vegetable shortening. So it's both fatty and sugary. And so basically the animal maybe is going to have to push the button 5 times, and then 10 times, and then 15 times, and then 20 times, and then 25 times to get the reinforcer. And basically the animal just keeps having to work harder and harder and harder and harder and harder to get the reinforcement. And so think about, how long will it go before it's going to give up in order to get that stuff? And the reason we typically aren't using those kinds of schedules is because it's really frustrating, right? It can get really, really frustrating as it gets harder and harder and harder and harder to get the same amount of whatever you're getting. And, and especially, if the increments are increasing in great amounts, so that's another thing, as animal trainers, we typically are increasing in little tiny increments. So that can also impact, how this goes. So those are little things that, to consider in terms of procedure. We don't know how those increments were increased. And again, if it's really tiny, then the animal might not be as frustrated. So those are all things to look at it when you're reading these articles. And what else was I going to say about that? Oh, and then, like I said, they could also introduce shock into that, or they could have done that separately to see, if it would tolerate an aversive and work harder, or they could have done that separately to as a separate experiment to see how willing the animal would work. And again, I go back to, if we think about our behavior science, it's all about how those procedures are implemented in terms of, how much we influence the behavior of the animal to work for those. So does extinction come into play here? Yeah. So sure. Sure. So those are some, these, again, I'm throwing these out here as things as food for thought, as a discussion topic. I'm not saying, yes or no stuff here. I just want you to think a little bit. And just some food for thought here. So one other thing that I don't think has been brought up yet, I think it's in their conclusions, so I might throw it in here, is the other thing. Well, they mention it once here, this binge eating thing. So you guys may recall from a previous live stream we talk about binge eating behavior, and that binge eating behavior is something that can be taught, right? And how binge eating behavior happens is when we withhold food from an animal for for periods of time, or animals learn that food is only available for a short period of time, and you can make, so if we've withheld food from an animal, we've made it so that food is only available for a short window of time. And especially if you deprive an animal, you can teach an animal that you need to eat a lot of food in a short window of time. So you can teach an animal to binge, right? So now let's throw into that equation a high fat, high sugar item, and it's available during this short window of time. So now you might create an animal that is crazy nutso about this high fat sugar item, because you've also created a binge eater. So it might learn to do everything that you see in 1, 2, 3, 4 because of the conditions that you've created. Do you see that there? And that's kind of what they're saying there, is that, so they're saying that this can be induced in rats with a history of binging on fat. So if you teach an animal to be a binge eater and then throw in there some of these food items that are more inclined to be consumed in large quantities because they're highly palatable and they're, high energy items. So now if you were to, create the situation in which an animal is like, oh my God, it's, my most favorite food item in the entire world, and you're only making it available for 5 minutes, and I'm deprived, and I'm going to eat as much of it as I possibly can in a short period of time. Then you might find that you have created an animal that has learned to do a behavior that, when you operationalize it, looks like addiction, right? And so it may start behaving in a way that it will do whatever it can to eat that food. The animal binges on food in general, or just the preferred food item. And I don't know. It depends. It depends on what conditions have been set up, right? Yeah. I think it all just depends on what's been created. So like, so maybe it does already binge in general, and now you've introduced one of these high fat, high sugary food items, and it's an animal that responds to that, responds to high fat, because you're thinking, wow, I could get really great motivation if I used this food item, and it already is a binge eater. And now it goes, whoa, oh my God, it's my favorite food item in the entire world. And so now it really goes crazy for that stuff, and then it starts overeating that, and then maybe it, so maybe you're getting like crazy, responses, like really great responses, and you think, yeah, that's exactly what I wanted, but now it's like crazy obsessed with getting, I don't know. My friends and I were talking the other night about like favorite childhood foods. Some people's probably going to think this is really gross, but my mom used to make these sandwiches that was like peanut butter and bacon sandwiches, which is like if you use commercial peanut butter, it's like all fat and sugar and salt, and then add bacon to it. It's really gross and fatty. But so I don't know if you could imagine that now. So when I was reading all this, so again, even though addiction is really just, do we really see that in animals or not, I guess would depend on if we've created these conditions. So I don't know. So while you're thinking about that, I'm going to show, let's look at some videos. Now, I don't necessarily think that these are animals that are showing addictive behavior, but they're showing some relationships with food that are not necessarily okay, and it just made me think. So my twos will eat a bowl of sunflower seeds before their other food. Oh no, are they addicted? Well, that's what I'm saying. I don't think it's all addiction. That's why. But I'm seeing conditions in which we could create what is operationalized as addiction here if we weren't careful. And that's why I think that's why I wanted to have this discussion, because I think there's some interesting things to unpack here. But like I said, even the videos I'm going to show you, I don't think are necessarily animals that are showing, quote, addictive behavior. Sometimes eating certain food is just showing a preference. Yeah. And also, our animals don't necessarily have free access to everything, so they can't necessarily, just go overeat or constantly seek all these things. But like I'm gonna show you these sun bears in Indonesia, and they don't normally, they're in a sanctuary where they get fed when they get fed. And we were using diluted honey in these juice bottles to train them, and they don't normally get honey except for as like a very, very special thing, like if they were going to try to put medication on a wound or something like that. And this is one of the things that I've noticed in a lot of the situations where we would work with I shouldn't say a lot, but there's been a few incidences where I've been working with sun bears and we used honey where the bears would get, almost, just aggressive trying to get at anything with honey on it. So it made me think, wow, this is really, really highly preferred. And honey is just straight sugar. And you think about, what could happen with honey and some of these animals. And so in this particular case, these bears had learned to vocalize, and not so much for honey, but it actually, there was a context. It had to do with certain people that were in that space, that you'll see are not there in the second half of the video. In the very beginning, they're there. They had learned to vocalize when those people were around, which were predictors about certain reinforcers. When those people left, the vocalizations stopped. But and so they had learned to make vocalizations, to get what they wanted, and we were using the honey to reinforce behaviors that we wanted. But honey is just like straight on sugar and was really important to those bears. I was really looking for this other video. I just couldn't find it, where we were training a sun bear, and it would literally show it definitely would show aggressive behavior if things with bread with honey on it wasn't being delivered fast enough. And that was our first training session with it. And so we were trying to figure out how can we teach this animal to be calm in order to get what we want, but at the same time trying not to trying to work it out so that we could get desired responses but not get that aggressive behavior, but at the same time keep going through our training session. Anyway, I'm going to show you these bears, but you'll see their response to honey.
That they will understand that if they follow our order, they will get the food. Not because they are doing something bad, right? I know those ones.
Yeah. What I'm seeing is that we have. They also yeah, well, that's what I don't know if you heard what I was saying, but that all this is reinforced behavior.
Yeah, I see this one here. India try to be positive.
So they have learned to to scream because that's what's been reinforced.
Yeah,
from
he doesn't like
the
same food.
No, he doesn't. He only wants honey now because this is the better stuff.
Yeah.
So what they've learned is if I scream, I get what I want. So what's interesting about their body language when they're screaming is it's very calm. If you look at their faces are calm and relaxed.
Yeah.
They just are screaming.
It's not stress. They're throwing
If I scream, if I do a fake cry at my mother, I will get what I want.
Yeah.
And I think you make a good point, Colleen. The moment they left, they're not screaming.
Yeah.
So they've definitely learned to do that behavior because it works for them.
Yep.
It works with them to get what they want.
Yeah.
Well, if you find in the parent that deals with them.
Good. So now we can get what we want.
But this is really good for them to see.
Yep. Video now. So now we have bears that work.
Jadi dia fokus sama targetnya.
Yep. Good. Yep. Trusty.
And as long as her paw doesn't come out, just her nose.
Selama tangannya nggak keluar, bagus kasih.
Good.
Good. Yeah. Okay.
Alright, good job. Good job.
Okay.
Good. Yep.
So as soon as she hits it, give her honey.
Yeah.
Good
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it's a hard one.
Good. Yeah.
Kamu jahat ya.
Good job, Arnold, too.
Arnold's a good trainer.
Yeah.
Watched him in action this morning.
Good.
Pindah ke sana, Mbak ya?
Yeah, I would take her that way. I wouldn't take her towards Denny since she's working with. Yep, she's following you.
Oh, nice. Oh, he's going live.
Good job.
I think he's ready for that.
Good girl, India.
Baby steps.
He can't stop using his paws. Yeah, so I mean, like Ruth was saying, that sometimes it's just a preferred reinforcer, and we can use it carefully, but we also have to think about like what I would want to really be sure about with those bears is that, I'm probably gonna always make sure they've had a nice big meal of and full bellies, and since that is a preferred reinforcer, that I'm not gonna work them before a meal. I'm going to make sure they've had a meal, that they're not going, long delays between getting fed. I just don't want to set them up so that they are so desperate to get something that when it comes time to use that honey, that they're not going, oh my God, give me honey. I don't need to do that, right? Honey is just, it's nice and it's extra, but we don't need to make it extra. Because then I'm really going to be in trouble. Yes, good strategies. Another one with, and you could see like those bars, the enclosures, the openings are big, and those bears could reach through. And that was one of the challenges we were trying to do, is teach them to keep their paws within, because they kept swiping to get to the honey. The one that I was working with in particular kept swiping his paws through there. And, so can you imagine if that animal had been, had it been before a meal time and I was using this high sugar item that's so highly preferred, I think I would have a really hard time even getting to reinforce calm responses. And so I really would have been setting myself up for a bad situation there. I thought I'd show you this other guy, Greppy. We've looked at Greppy before. He's a blind orangutan, and in the beginning we couldn't get him to do anything. And in this video, you'll see him targeting all over his enclosure to a target that rattles. And I may just let it play and talk over it. I'll put the video or audio down. Actually, the audio is down. I might put it up a little bit so you can hear the rattle, because that's what he responds to, is the sound of the. We put pebbles inside the buoy, so it makes a little rattling noise, and that's what he reaches out towards, because he was shot in the forest, and so he still has like little fragments in his head, and so that's why he's blind. But the biggest challenge with Greppy, I wouldn't call it like a food addiction per se or anything like that, but a different kind of challenging relationship with food is that this animal wouldn't eat anything except bananas. And you can see that half of a tire there on the outside of the enclosure. That's where they put the food. So they offer him different food items, but he literally will not eat anything except bananas. And so when we started training him, we would only use banana, and then and he will, and sometimes he'll eat egg, and so we would also give him a hard-boiled egg, but that was pretty much it, just banana and egg. And we tried a lot of different strategies to get him to eat other things. We did use honey, actually, and would coat other things in honey, and he didn't really respond to that. Although banana's pretty sweet on its own, but sometimes I find like animals don't, they may not even recognize other things as food items. That can be a challenge. Was that all he would eat during training, or just all he would eat, period? That was all he would eat, period. Not even just training. So there's other kinds of challenges that can happen with food, not just, and again, not relating this to addiction per se, but, and I've seen, and some of you that know parrots, I've seen situations where parrots just don't recognize certain things as food items. And I can't say that that's what happened with Greppy. I don't know why he wouldn't necessarily eat the other food items. I've seen great apes that don't trust certain food items. And I know, Annetta, when I was at your place, you're at Copenhagen Zoo, the team in the chimp house shared some stories about that, chimps that have come from research settings where food had things in it because they were trying to test certain drugs or something, and so the animals learned, well, you don't trust that food, and so they had to teach the animals there to start trusting that certain food was okay, that it didn't have medications in it. And so that can certainly happen. And I've seen that happen with other animals too. Like, if sorry, I'll get to a slide here. Sorry. Like I've seen, a raven that, if it got worming medication that made it sick afterwards, that it wouldn't eat the food, and, vultures and things like that. Yes, food from people was aversive, and Annetta was saying. So I've seen ravens that are like, put off by food after it's had, and a vulture that wouldn't eat whole mice because people would hide the medication within the mice and things like that. So there's lots of different reasons why animals might not eat certain foods, and you basically have to retrain them. But with parrots, like, they'll think, pellets are rocks, they haven't learned that they're food, and so there's lots of different things that can be going on there. So it's not, there's lots more to explore sometimes in those situations than just to be like, oh, well, they're addicted to bananas. And then I wanted to show Benny. This is an orangutan we worked with that was part of the groups of animals that were being ready to be released onto pre-release islands. And I think Benny's an interesting one to look at because he's a physically large orangutan compared to the other orangutans in his group. And anybody who watched Jungle Island, which was the series on Smithsonian, which follows these baby orangutans as they're basically being, raised to be released back into the wild in Borneo. Benny is, kind of the joke about Benny was that, he's always eating and that he always wants to eat. And they show like a little clip where he's broken into the shed where all the bananas are, and he's on a pile of bananas, just shoving bananas in his face. But when you look at Benny, he physically is bigger than all the other orangutans his size. But he's like, it's kind of like looking at like Andre the Giant, if you remember him from The Princess Bride. He was just a physically bigger animal. It wasn't that he was overweight in the sense of, had, extra fat or anything. He just was built physically bigger. But he also had learned to do behaviors like trying to grab at juice bottles, or if you had food behind your back, he would try to grab that from you. So he also had learned bad behaviors about trying to get food, but they had also tried to restrict his access to preferred food items. Like all the other animals would get the bananas and the more sugary fruits, but he was being limited in his access to the higher sugar fruits, and so that made him want those things more. And so if he was nearby a group of animals that had sugary things, he would want to go over there and try and get those things. And he was bigger, and he was, for the most part, a pretty gentle animal, but he, if he was being denied things that he really wanted, obviously he would want to go over there and try and get those things. So you're just going to see in this clip, we were using sugar-free juices, and also they were still getting a soy milk that the babies would get from the babysitters. They call them the babysitters, the women that would take care of these animals. And you'll see him getting those from the bottles, and then you're going to see us working on teaching the babysitters how to reinforce him for good behavior so that he learns not to try and grab the juice bottles from the babysitters. And then we also taught all the orangutans how to trade, how to give us things back, and he learned how to do that too, but you're not going to see that in this clip. Pass it off. Yeah, you might have to stand up. He's going to grab that. Pass it off. There we go. Good. Yeah, you got it. Thank you.
Okay, now he's grabbing. Lempar. And training.
So, and just to kind of follow up, I saw a post not too long ago that Benny is out on a pre-release island now, and those islands they look, very much like out in the, like animals out in the wild. So he's doing pretty well from what I understand. So that's pretty cool. But and so what you can see there in the end there, the goal was not to get him to to try and reinforce before he actually starts reaching and grabbing for things. And so that's what they were working on. They obviously were getting that idea there. Okay, so let's see. So what the symposium overview paper said is that their conclusions were that there's evidence that neurological similarities exist in the response of humans and rats to foods and to drugs. And reports suggest that even highly palatable food is not addictive in and of itself, right? So I think that's really important. It's rather that it's the manner in which the food is presented. So if it's intermittent and if it's consumed repeated, intermittent and gorging, so that's that binging thing, that appears to entrain the addiction-like process. Such consumatory patterns are associated with increased risk for comorbid complications, as well as relapse, and make treatment particularly challenging. So, I think that kind of, kind of ties in with a lot of the things that we've been talking about, that it's not so much that, animals are necessarily developing all these quote food addictions. I think it just sort of says something about thinking about some of the practices that we do and how it could impact relationships to food, and that what looks like great motivation could be creating a situation in which maybe an animal has a relationship for food with food that may not be great animal welfare, I think is what I kind of got from reading all that, right? So we could be, so for example, if we create these situations where animals are inclined to binge on food, which, that's a whole nother topic that we've discussed. And if we are gravitating towards using high fat, high sugar items frequently, and in large quantities, which, for some species, that it could create situations where animals are maybe in a state where it can affect their biology, their physiochemistry that's going on in there. And then again, this kind of comes back to some of the things that we've talked about in other things, like in podcasts and other live streams about these degrees of freedom. Like, can animals access these things in reinforcers in other ways, or are we limiting their ability to access reinforcers? And so, I know we've talked before about weight management, but it also makes us think about food management. Is that there are some things that need fine tuning there. And then the other thing that it really made me think about is that, how else can we make participation in our training programs reinforcing? So, I know we talk a lot about food, but, it makes you start thinking about the other ways to make participation reinforcing. So I don't know, those are the thoughts that I had. I don't know about you guys. I know you're a little quiet right now. But yeah, so, knowing that there's a potential for some of the especially the affective and physiological responses that, we've described in the human experience and in some of the rat studies. Obviously all these studies haven't been done with a lot of animals, but we know that potential is there, and that some of the management practices overlap. It just gives you some food for thought. That was what I got out of it. It just made me think. And so that's what I appreciated out of it. And again, all these things are just kind of food for thought, take you down the rabbit hole a little bit. All right, so maybe to recap here, it sounds like some foods can be more addictive than others, especially foods rich in fat and sugar, energy dense for some organisms. These foods, although highly palatable, are not addictive per se, but become so following a restriction binge pattern of consumption. Sorry, guys. Evidence that neurological similarities exist in the response of humans and rats to food and to drugs. Rat models have clearly shown the periodic energy deprivation, quote, dieting, contributes to binge type eating, and that I'm just so tongue-tied. And that abstinence from fatty, sugary foods for even a non-food deprived animal can promote binging when that food is subsequently available for consumption. Food for thought. How does this research impact the way you think about creating food motivation for food and the relationship animals have with food? So that's kind of where I was going with all that. So, and as I mentioned, there is a live stream on training induced binge eating behavior and how it happens and potential welfare implications. And that was, inspired by another paper I read that was basically all excited about. They were basically testing some drugs to see if it would help people. I forget what they were testing. Was it testing for I don't know. But anyway, they created rats that could binge eat, and they were so excited that they created that. And I was like, oh, we do that with animals all the time. So anyway, so that's what that was about. What else is on the horizon? Goats. We had a little change in schedule, but if you hadn't heard about it yet, Jim Mackey is going to do his presentation on the economic value of zoo animal training. This is a new and improved version, a longer version with more examples and a little more detail. And that is going to be on March 21st. Do I have the date on there? Yes, I do. 11 a.m. and registration is open. If you're a member of animaltrainingfundamentals.com, you get to attend for free and you get to watch the replay for free. If you're not a member, you can still join us. There is a link at atfgoats.com to register for that if you are not a member. And if you are a member and want to go to the live, just send me a note, send me an email, and I'll add you to that list. Not much new going on the legal front right now, but if you want to learn more about slap suits, you can go to animaltrainingfundamentals.com and what are slap suits, and that'll keep you updated as to what those are. And what's new? Oh, yeah. So the discount to join animaltrainingfundamentals.com ends on March 1st. That's just a couple days, or tomorrow. Oh, geez, I forget we're in February. So go to animaltrainingfundamentals.com, pick a membership option, and then right above select payment method, you'll see have a coupon. You enter that coupon, and that should give you the discount. If for any reason it doesn't work, just email me, and I will make sure you are all set up. All right. There we go. We're done. Chris says, makes me think about how I manage the food for my twos and maybe how I can change it for better for their welfare. Yeah, and I don't know that we need to change or not. Oh, and Sheila B says, love you. Thank you. Yeah, and I'm not saying that anybody's doing anything, that's not necessarily okay. This is the kind of stuff that I find fun to read and think about. And Gus just joined us now. Well, you can watch the replay, it's okay. I just find these things fun to challenge my thinking, because I'm enjoying growing, I guess, growing as a trainer. I think it's fun to question things I've done in the past and moving on, completely ignoring how addictive these talks are. I don't know if they're addicting or not, but yeah, every time I read something and it makes me think differently about things I've done in the past, I find that fun. I don't know. I don't know if you guys know who Donald Bear is, but he was quite a famous behavior analyst. And, one of the things that I'm sure I'm not going to quote him correctly, but there was something about what could be more fun than learning how we are, it's basically saying, what could be more fun than learning about behavior? And I just find it fascinating to keep learning. And so to me, to keep evolving and changing and asking questions and figuring it out and figuring out that what you thought you knew you didn't know, I don't know, I kind of find that fun. and you can't do that on your own. You really have to look at what other people are doing and think about how does that carry over into the discipline that you have. And so I don't know, that's for me what's fun. Annetta says, I think this live stream has an important message. I started using nectar to train a marmoset, but stopped because of the exact reasons, addiction to sugar. So thank you for the great live stream as always. Yeah, that's interesting. One thing I've started to do is give to give SFs throughout the day as well as in their dinner. I found their motivation to train has not diminished. Oh, sunflower seeds. I was like, what? One thing I've started to do is give sunflower seeds throughout the day as well as in their dinner. I found their motivation to train has not diminished. Oh, you know what I really like about that, Chris, is that makes me think about all the stuff about, degrees of freedom that, like Sean and Masa talk about a lot with Israel Gold Diamond's work and behavioral freedom. And, Joe Lang talks about is, do animals have the ability to access the same reinforcing consequences elsewhere, but they choose to participate in what you're asking them to do because you found other ways to make, what you're doing reinforcing as well. It's more than just, there's more, you've made what you're asking them to do, equally or more reinforcing because there's more going on there. You know what I mean? There's more reinforcers to it than just that, that little bite of food. So it basically is saying, that, it's really fun to interact with you. And I think that's why, when I was saying, the thing about, additional reinforcers or I forget where I said it, but there was something in there about, how else can we find reinforcement in the process, in the program. I think that's really speaking to me, and again, it ties in with Joe's book, about the nonlinear contingency analysis. Are we looking at all the reinforcing, all the things that impact that behavior, not just that cookie that we deliver at the end, all the things that are impacting why that animal participates in your program. Again, going back to our whole thing about there's so much more to behavior than that little bit that I learned about whenever. So I don't know, I love the idea of keep evolving and keep talking about it. So again, everything we talked about here today, this is just a little kernel of something to get you thinking more. And it was not the end of this discussion by any means, and not some big statement about anything. It's just stuff that gets me thinking, and hopefully gets you thinking as well. And that's sort of the idea of these live streams, is just to give you some kernels of information to think about, and think about, how does it impact our training? How does it impact the choices we make, and what you might do in the future? Because it's all just interesting. So there you go. So yes, and Netta and Chris are all excited about these ideas. I see. So very nice. All right. Well, yeah. So I think if you guys look up Rebecca Corwin and food addiction and binge eating, she's obviously a lot of her work is about trying to help humans, but she uses a lot of animal models to help her get there. And so I found a lot of that stuff that she was writing very interesting. And again, she was somebody that Joe Lang suggested I check out. And so that's what sent me down that pathway. So you guys may want to look up those resources and read some of her material as well, and see if it inspires you a little bit. All right. I think that does it for today. I appreciate you all being here with me. I thought that was interesting for me, hopefully interesting for you, and we'll see what we look at next week. Will you share the article on ATF? Yeah, I can definitely put it up there. I have a PDF, and it was a open source article, so it's just a review of a symposium, but it does have a nice summary of the things that we discussed, so I'll share it there for sure. Yep. Okay, great. Thanks again, guys, and I look forward to seeing you. I should be here next week. Yes, I should be here next week, so I will see you then. All right. Take care, everybody.